Hello, my friends, and welcome back to 15-Minute Free Thinking with Carpo. I wasn't sure how to address this particular topic, and so I decided to make it a dual video slash podcast. The part that I'm uploading on YouTube will be the less controversial side of it, and the one that's less likely to get my channel terminated. As many of you know, I've talked about topics in the past that had my channel get strikes against it because of the YouTube algorithm, and this particular topic is no different, so I have to touch lightly. There are many things that I would rather talk about than Israel and Palestine, and the reason I bring up the controversy of topics is because if I have an opinion against Israel, then I'm likely to be chastised by many people. The United States has been especially the evangelical community, and there's a psychology behind this and a reason, but this all comes down to Holy Land. And I'm not going to get into that part of it at all here. My topic is specifically about the current unfolding events in Israel and Palestine, which I'd like to start off by saying there's a particular line from a song that always comes to mind when I hear the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And I thought, man, I think this came out in the late 90s, but I had to look it up, and no, it actually came out in 1993. So, so what, 28 years ago? This is a long time ago that this song came out, and I'm just going to play one line from it for you. This is a song by Propaganda. So here we go.
The West Bank, the Gaza Strip, soon to be parking lots for American tourists.
Yes.
And fascist cops, yeah.
I don't want to play more of that because I don't know what Propaganda's copyright issues are. And no, I don't agree with every one of Propaganda's songs or their crazy anger towards everything from meat eaters to governments, but that particular line always comes to mind because this was during a time of conflict. There have been several different, what were they called, infata or infatida. There were two of them, which were uprisings of Arabs against Israel. But the thing is that there are so many misunderstood aspects of what's going on over there that it's so hard to even talk about. The United States has been a strong ally and supporter of Israel since its formation in 1948 after World War II. Now, do I believe that Israel deserves their own space, their own land? Of course, everyone deserves their own land. Do I agree with the way that they went about it? The way that the other countries went about supporting them and defending, basically occupying existing land, which is what they did. I'm not going to get into that aspect of it either, because that's history, and we need to move forward. But the history is so entwined with what's going on that it's hard not to talk about. Now, about 20% of the population within Israel, within the borders of Israel, 20%, 1 in 5 people consider themselves Arabs or Palestinians. Some are Palestinian Israelis. Many of them consider themselves not Israeli at all, because when Israel developed their borders, they allowed a certain amount of people to remain. You can't just execute everyone, which is what they probably wanted to do at a point. But right now what's happening is, and you may have heard this in the media, the Israeli settlers, as they call them, and that in quotation, settlers. In the old days, a settler, I live out in, the Pacific Northwest. When I read about settlers in school, settlers were people who came out to land that was not occupied and set up farms. But even the settlers here in the U.S. were setting up farms in land that the Native Americans had been using. So the idea of settling in someone else's territory is nothing new. But these particular settlers are literally walking into Palestinians' homes, or rather people in Israel or even outside some of the areas that they want to occupy. They're taking over the homes of people who have lived there, and their families have lived there for, generations. and basically telling the people, you have to leave. What's going on over there is nothing short of ethnic cleansing in its own right, but it's being swept under the rug because the United States not only has a position in the Middle East by supporting Israel, but we also have a great partner to sell weapons to. And many might think that Israel imports all its weapons from the United States, and we sure sell them a lot of planes and missiles, but they build a lot of their own weapons. From what I read, Israel is the largest exporter per capita of weapons in the world. Now, the U.S. obviously sells more, but we're talking per capita for the size of the country. There has always been contention, but when I saw what happened the other day as Israeli police forces raided I believe it was the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They raided the mosque. They fired rubber bullets, tear gas, and crowd control munitions, if you will. Hundreds of people are hurt. 87 people have died in this conflict on the Palestinian side already within this whole issue that's been going on right now. And this might get a lot worse before it ever, if it ever, gets better. And why am I even talking about it? Because it bothers me. It bothers me that the United States has a position where even the media will never talk bad about Israel. We won't even challenge the narrative. And so, as a lone YouTuber, I figure it's my responsibility to talk about it. Now, the minute you mention support for anyone except Israel, your channel will have its ad revenue stifled, or at worst, have your channel deleted and your videos removed, because they consider it anti-Semitic. And this is the part of it that pisses me off. Disagreeing with the government of Israel is not anti-Semitism in any way, shape, or form whatsoever at all. In fact, many people who are Israelis, who are Jews within Israel, even many of the Hasidic Jews, they do not support the government. Obviously, this is why we have elections. They do not support the influx of, Israeli citizens into other areas that are already occupied and claiming them as their own. And the West Bank and the Gaza Strip have been in dispute for far too long. The history is insane when you look back at all the different borders that have been drawn in the Middle East. The truth is that it was Western influences like the U.S. and Britain that drew many of these borders in the first place. If you find out where these borders came in the Middle East, they were created by Western interests. And if anyone's still denying that we're only there for resources, I don't know why we have our head in the sand about that one. But yes, there's a lot of oil, there's a lot of easy to access oil, and people who can't defend themselves. But that's not Israel's issue. We want the oil here for us in America. Israel doesn't care about the oil. They care about the power, the land, and they have such what they call the Iron Dome. Their defense system is so effective against any barrage of incoming missiles or anything that Palestinians or Hamas could throw at them, that the idea that you should retaliate with blowing up high-rise buildings in order to take out a couple of Hamas leaders while killing 10 children and 87 civilians just in this little skirmish, not to mention all the actual damage that's being done. Now, as I'm talking about this, Israel is amassing on the border of the West Bank, and they are set up to basically with their tanks and their missile barrages, and we don't know where this is going to go from here. From me sitting over here in Vancouver, Washington, in the United States, protected by my own military and borders, why should I give a shit? Because I put myself in the position of a Palestinian who has an occupying force with far more firepower, trying to dominate my people, trying to dominate and take over my home, my land. And then when you retaliate by throwing rocks, anything you have, or sticks, or bricks, you're shot dead. Now, you hear the term Hamas as if it's some sort of an evil terrorist group, but very few people would dare to labeled Israel a terrorist state. I believe they are. By definition, I believe Israel is a terrorist state at this point. However, I also believe that terrorism can be a direct response to terrorism. This is why we have things like groups like Hamas, which formed in order to rebel against Israel. You don't create an army and run around trying to blow people up unless you have a reason for it, or at least you think you have a reason for it. Just like the United States created many of these little terrorist cells and organizations merely by leaving a power vacuum, by going in and blowing up their leaders and then leaving. I'm not saying I support these terrorist groups. They are misguided often. But when it comes to Hamas trying to protect themselves against Israeli settlers, it's difficult to not have a little bit of empathy and understanding on where they're coming from. These holy site battles have been going on for a long time. Temple Mount and these various, mosques and the synagogues for the Jewish. And I find it sickening what's going on. I really do. I find it sickening that a nation as powerful as Israel, not only do they import weapons, but they create their own, as I said, and they test them on the Palestinians. This is well known and well documented. The most recent one is one of their private security firms who created a product called skunk water, and they are the ones who are exporting it to the world. Skunk water is sprayed out of those water cannons. When you see them spraying Palestinians, it's not just water. It's called skunk water. It's a chemical irritant. It can actually irritate your skin. Some people claim hair loss. But what it really is intended to do is stink really bad. If it gets on your skin, it can smell for a day. If it gets in your house, it'll stink for days. And Israel is basically, threatening and intimidating anyone who speaks up against Israeli occupation. They've been known to go drive a truck up to a business and spray that business with skunk water, knowing that they won't be able to do business for a few days, at least. There are people not just being arrested for having an opinion or speaking out or protesting, but they've been arresting protesters' parents in order to try to quell their violence, which is completely against, basically all the things they are doing are against any international code that we have. The things, the occupation and the way that they're moving in and settling, this has been, what's the word I'm looking for? It's been spurned or, the international community has said that it's unacceptable, yet nobody does anything about it. I find this a time where people should speak up more about these things, and I can't imagine trying to justify being, the Israeli government by firing rockets into these places. Here's my thought on this. If you have one of these strongest, most powerful militaries in the world, you are a nuclear force. You have F-16s, you've got drones, you have special tactical teams. What does it mean to send a missile in and blow up an apartment building or a business building, when we know that you could send in a tactical team, take care of the same business with minimum, if none, as far as civilian casualties? Who's the real coward when you're just sending missiles into a city? So this is where I'm going to leave for the, this part of it. I think I'm going to finalize this and just keep this as a separate podcast. There were other parts I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to finish up the podcast part and go down my list of patrons and thank you, everybody. And I will, I guess I should just recite those now. So that's the end of this video, but I'd like to go over my patrons to say thank you. My next video is going to be about my dislike of Elon Musk. That one's a little trickier. More complicated than that. But my patrons: Kendra Tolliver, Dane, Ken, Deedster, Speciosa Saves, Jordan Vigil, Kendra Tolliver, Owen Howell, Trisha Bell, Wellbeing, Charles Castaneda, Sean Schwartzwelder, Violetta Doroshenko, Stephen, Ryan L., Pure Brew, Josh O'Brien, Robin W., Zelda Zonk, Tim Smith, River Milliken, Adam Manzinson, Matthew Langheim, Matt Hemingway, Jake Dugan, MJ Pritchett, Sean Fitzpatrick, Bill Hunt, Highway Child, Seam Bob J. McBroderick, rather, Rob Frenzen, Chris Morales, Algiridas Vallis, Brianna Rotten, Jake Alberg, Alexander Walpole, Russell Imam, Pia Ewings, Riku Ilvanen, The Hill and Moon, Mumps, John Peterson, Joshua Nicholson, Don Starnes, Deborah E. Chan, and William Hall. I have to do that at least once in a while. When I get a new computer here, I'm going to be able to edit in these at the end because my patrons definitely deserve recognition. A few of my past patrons are Rochelle Borth, Emilio, and Jason, and I have a whole list out there. I finally made a list of all my past and present patrons, and I want to make it worth your time. So I'm going to be including a lot more, let's just say, Patreon kind of hidden videos that are unlisted on YouTube, that are just meant to be shared on Patreon. And I think a lot of these controversial topics need to be heard by more people. So it's always tricky as to which one I can and can't, or should and shouldn't put on YouTube. For those who don't know already, when it comes to all my psychedelic videos or videos about herbs, kratom, things like that, these are all on separate files, unlisted, and they can all be accessed through playlists on my Patreon page. And you don't always have to necessarily be a patron to get them. Some of them are accessible regardless. So thank you all for listening, and I'd love to hear what you all have to say about Israel and what you think about what's going on over there, assuming this video isn't flagged and removed by YouTube by their, AI bots that are always searching for anything that, is controversial to the narrative. What I'd like to say on that issue is that the more I get censored, just like everyone else out there, the more of my videos that get censored, the more that YouTube cuts things out and deletes them, the more it lights a fire under my ass to talk about these topics even more. You can't hide these things. These are important issues. And our government in the U.S. has continuously supported Israel. Of course, I'm not going to get into Kushner being, Jewish and how, Trump never said a word. Well, now we've got Biden and he's no better. He said the other day, he asked actually this morning if Israel could reduce their missile barrages. Bullshit, dude. Grow a set of fucking balls. You don't need to reduce. You need to stop that shit. Be the bigger man. It's like, I thought about this, like if a kid, small little kid is trying to fight a bully, you don't beat the kid up to make a point. It's just ridiculous. It's not going to solve the problem. Not to compare them to kids, I guess. These are human beings and people who have lived in their area for their whole lives, just like you and I have. And what would you do to defend your territory and your land and your home? Thanks for listening. Peace. Be well, my friends.